Blood spatters from my abdomen as this strange man slowly walks towards me. Beneath my back, I feel the sand, usually smooth and warm, but this time is different. This time, the sand is hard and scratchy, and slowly but surely, all I can see is just fuzzy and fuzzier as the pain intensifies. The strange man is blind to my pain. He reaches into my jean pockets and I try to reach for my phone so that I can ask for help, call somebody, but my hand is trembling. My body refuses to move. Someone help me, please help me. Instead of words for help, my mouth involuntarily vomits blood. The bright light behind that man becomes wider and wider as time goes by. Is this the end for me? And so, Carlos died. This was Pedro Pablo Nakara's first victim, and Carlos Aguilar had the unfortunate fate to cross paths with Pedro, Peru's worst serial killer. Carlos Aguilar is known as Chato, which is Peruvian slang for short man, and he is more than just a familiar face in Chancay, which is a small city north of Lima. He's 26 years old and he has a vibrant spirit. He has an unwavering dedication to his work and he is really known for his tireless work ethic. He spends his days toiling under the sun, earning an honest living just to support himself and his loved ones. He really loves his mother. His mom is this Peruvian lady. She's quite short, about 140 to 150 centimeters tall, and she loves Carlos deeply. She tells her friends about him, how he works day and night just so that he can support the family, just so that he can help her out with the finances at home. Carlos is a good son, she would say often. Carlos has a sun-kissed skin and an easy smile, and he's just cherished by friends and admired by many for his kind heart and affable nature. In the quiet moments between his shifts, Carlos would often share with co-workers about his aspirations for the future. I want to pursue a trade. Maybe that way I can earn more money and help out my mom. One day, Carlos decides to take a walk in his favorite place. He decides to go to the Chorrito de Chancay beach, where the gentle waves slap against the shore and where he finds peace in the serenity of the ocean breeze. This day happens to be January 1st of 2005. And on this fateful first evening of the year, as the golden hues of sunset painted the sky, Carlos strolled along the sandy shores. His thoughts were filled with hopes for the future and the new year ahead. Little did he know that tragedy lurked just beyond the horizon. Armed with a 9mm pistol equipped with rubber silencers, Pedro Pablo Nakara stood in the way of Carlos and shot him in the chest and abdomen. In an instant, Carlos' life was irrevocably changed, cut short by one single shot. There was no abrupt sound of gunfire to shatter the peaceful ambience of the beach. There was no noise. Pedro Pablo Nakara had made his own rubber silencers. I learned this skill on the internet. I made them from my own sneakers that I bought for that sole purpose, he would say. And this was his first murder. Carlos had the unfortunate fate of crossing paths with Pedro Pablo Nakara, Peru's worst serial killer, who confessed to having killed over 25 people between January 2005 and December 2006, becoming the bloodiest serial killer in the history of Peru. His mission was to limpiar el mundo de la escoria, which means cleanse the world of scum. Those were his words. And in this way, he would be obeying God, whom, according to Pedro Nakara, gave him the order to kill. Before we dive into today's case, a few disclaimers. As a creator on this platform, I fully support YouTube's dedication to cultivating a safe and positive environment for viewers and creators alike, and I am committed to creating high-quality content that aligns with YouTube's community guidelines and advertiser-friendly policies. I thank you for the opportunity to participate in this community and contribute to its positive evolution. I wanted to make sure I get as much of the language and cultural background to fully grasp this case, so I did all my research from Spanish sources, including court case notes, interviews to family members posted by the media, as well as other official and unfalsifiable documents. But please, if I overlooked any details or if there's anything amiss, please share it in the comments below. Your input helps maintain the accuracy and integrity of this channel. This case addresses sensitive themes of sexual and substance abuse, violence, self-harm, and mental issues which may be triggering or distressing to some viewers. If any of these are a sensitive topic to you, please take care of yourself and I will see you in the next video. So with that being said, let's get started. Pedro Pablo Nacara Ludeña was born the 28th of February of 1973 in El Agustino, a district in the city of Lima, Peru. His birth name was Pedro Pablo Mesias Ludeña, which is ironic to me considering that Mesias in Spanish means Messiah, the King of the Jews, a savior who will be sent to them by God. But Pedro was the complete opposite. He was not a Messiah, he was a murderer, a serial killer. Later in life, Pedro paid off a Japanese man to adopt him, just so that he could get his last name with the hopes of one day maybe flying to Japan and immigrating to Japan. So he changed his last name to Nacara. In many Spanish-speaking countries, including Peru, it's very common for people to have two last names. The two last names typically consist of the father's last name first and then the mother's last name. Peru is a country situated in western South America, and it has a diverse landscape that includes the Andes Mountains, the Amazon rainforest, and a Pacific coastline. Its history is deeply rooted in the Inca Empire, which left behind iconic landmarks like Machu Picchu, one of the most visited touristic attractions in the world. Spanish is the official language, but indigenous languages like Quechua and Aymara are also spoken. Today, Peru's culture reflects a blend of indigenous, European, African, and Asian influences, evident in its music, dance, and cuisine. If you look at the world map, you will see that Peru and Japan are actually on opposite sides of the world. Peru is situated in South America and Japan in East Asia. The distance between the capital cities, Lima, Peru, and Tokyo, Japan, is approximately 17,320 kilometers, so it's about 10,760 miles when measured as a straight line. So how did Pedro find a Japanese man walking down Peruvian streets? During the late 1800s and the 1930s, there were waves of Japanese immigration to various countries, including Peru. This was due to economic hardship and overpopulation in Japan. The largest establishment of the Japanese community occurred during the late 19th and early 20th centuries in Peru. So it was not uncommon to see Japanese living alongside Peruvians at all. Japanese immigrants were known as Nikkei, and they traveled to Peru to work mostly in agricultural plantations, particularly in sectors like sugarcane and cotton production. So just imagine yourself standing in the midst of a vast expanse of sugar cane or cotton fields. In the hot, humid climate of coastal Peru, the sun beats down relentlessly, casting long shadows across the endless rows of crops stretching out before you. And as you stepped into the fields, the earth beneath your feet just feels parched and unforgiving, with dry soil cracking under each footfall. Your hands, protected only by thin gloves, reach out to grasp the tough stalks of sugarcane or the prickly branches of cotton plants. And with each pull, you feel the resistance of the plants, their fibers stubbornly clinging to the earth. You exert yourself, your muscles straining against the weight of the harvest. The work unrelenting, demanding both physical endurance and mental fortitude. This was everyday life for those Japanese men aged 20 to 45 who toiled in the sugarcane and cotton fields of Peru, where the harshness of nature meets the resilience of the human spirit in a relentless battle for survival. I tried to find how much Japanese immigrants made in these plantations, and there was no certain factual information available on the internet. Some sources affirm the Japanese immigrants were paid 1,200 soles a year, which is about $420 a year. Other sources affirm that these men were not even compensated sometimes for their day's work. However, Toraji Irie, a Japanese agricultural engineer known for his work in developing techniques for rice cultivation, wrote History of Japanese Migration to Peru, and in part 2, he documented appeals sent from Japanese immigrants in Peru to their governors in Japan, begging them to bring them home. The letter reads, To Minoru Katsumada, Governor of Niigata-ken, Japan. 1. We made an agreement with Makoto Morioka to go to Peru to work for 10 hours a day. 2. The wage was to be 25 yen a month. 3. Many of us became ill because we're not used to the climate. We made a contract, but the employer has not been paying wages accordingly. He demands more work than we can possibly do. The employer canceled the contract and made a new agreement whereby we were to do piecework. 1 month's full-time work gave us a wage of 14 or 15 yen. Besides, the climate is bad. 50 to 60 persons are bedridden and 40 have already died here at Casablanca. We cannot continue working under such circumstances. These men were promised 25 yen and were taken advantage of to the point that they had to exert themselves for a little more than half their agreed salary. In case you're wondering, 15 yen was worth about 15 soles. In 1899, the sol was pegged to the US dollar at a fixed exchange rate of 2.5 soles per 1 US dollar, so 15 yen was worth $6. This injustice would only continue as the years went by. For this reason, in 2003, when Pedro approached a Japanese man named Nakara and offered him 800 soles, so about 235 US dollars, in exchange for adoption papers and the hopes of emigrating to Japan one day, Nakara, beaten by the day's work and the unfair pay, couldn't refuse the deal. And it was settled. Pedro then changed his paternal last name to Nakara by paying 800 soles to be adopted, even though he was a well-grown adult. His plan was to obtain a visa and fly to Japan. However, he never left Peru. Let's talk more about Pedro. Like many other serial killers, Pedro's childhood was marked by abuse and violence. Pedro was the third of 9 siblings and they lived in extreme poverty. A house of extreme poverty in Peru often resembles a fragile shell, barely providing any shelter from the harsh elements. It is built from makeshift materials like corrugated metal, scrap wood, and tattered tarps. Inside, space is cramped and amenities are non-existent. Rooms serve multiple purposes, with sleeping areas doubling as kitchen and living spaces. Floors are typically bare earth or uneven concrete. And there's a pervasive sense of dampness that seeps through the walls during the rainy season. The ventilation is poor, so there is excessive heat in the summer and bone-chilling cold in the winter. Basic utilities like running water and electricity are often absent. And according to the Peruvian National Institute of Statistics and Informatics, in Peru as of 2023, 3 out of 10 Peruvians fall under the category of poverty or extreme poverty. Pedro's family was extremely poor and lived under these circumstances. Sometimes they didn't have anything to eat. Pedro didn't even grow up with all his siblings. His parents couldn't afford to take care of all 9 kids. So some ended up living with some relatives, and we don't know what happened to the rest. Pedro's father was an alcoholic. He would often come home late at night, drunk after hours drinking out in the street. He would come home only to humiliate Pedro's mother by verbally and physically abusing her. Pedro was no stranger of his father's drunkenness. After abusing his mother, he would often hit Pedro with a cable, an electric cable. Pedro's father would scrutinize everything on and about him just to find a reason to hit him, and sometimes he would do it for no reason at all. Pedro would be beaten up regardless, even though he was just a little kid. When little Pedro turned 5, his older sisters started dressing him as a girl and forced him to parade out in the streets as if he was some sort of clown. He was their little doll, and they used him for entertainment. They loved humiliating him. The laughter and mockery of people would join that of his own sisters. Pedro realized that the outside world was as cruel as home. At school, things didn't get any better. While other children formed bonds and friendships as easily as they tied their shoelaces, Pedro remained on the outskirts. He was a silent observer in a world that seemed to have no place for him. His voice, when it dared to escape his lips, was drowned out by laughter of his peers. Their taunts and jeers were a constant reminder of his isolation. While all the kids played soccer or tag during recess, Pedro would just retreat to himself and draw stick figures on the dirty ground with his fingers. If there was any group work to be done, nobody would want him in their groups. He was rejected by everyone, unwanted, unloved. He was seen as a plague, an annoyance. He was an outcast. Pedro would later confess to reporters, "I didn't have any friendships with the other kids. Yes, I was lonely. Why? Because the kids were mean. They pulled my hair, they teased me all the time." According to the National Institute of Health, being bullied makes young people incredibly insecure. When you are being bullied, you can feel constantly insecure and on guard. Even if you're not actively being bullied, you're aware it could start anytime, and it has a big mental and emotional impact. You feel unaccepted, isolated, angry, and withdrawn. Bullying is also linked to many negative outcomes, including impacts on mental health, substance abuse, and suicide. Pedro was actually a submissive, shy, and quiet boy in nature. But we all know the toll abuse takes on people. To vent, Pedro would unleash his anger in animals. He started killing cats, but he not only tortured them. Allegedly, he would also smear himself with the blood of these defenseless animals. Killing and torturing animals is one of the 3 behaviors that characterizes most of serial killers' childhoods, and it is psychologically one of the most concerning, since the repetition of these cruel acts can gradually diminish one's empathetic capacity. Regarding the abuse he suffered at home, one of Pedro's worst traumas happened one tranquil afternoon Pedro will never forget. When he was only 4 years old, his brothers accused him of killing the family dog, which happened to be pregnant. Everybody was excited because they were going to have new members of the family, new puppies. Who doesn't get excited about getting new puppies? But suddenly, they found the dog killed. Pedro says that his older brothers accused him of killing the dog, even though he said again and again, "No, I didn't do it. Please, you need to believe me, I did not do it." But they didn't listen, and instead, as a punishment, Pedro's own older brothers raped him. I hate faggots. When I was a child, my brothers raped me because they thought I had killed a pregnant dog we had. I swear I did nothing to that animal. Until this day, Pedro stands behind that version. It can be clearly seen that that experience would trigger some homophobia that would later characterize Pedro's criminal behavior. And according to his own words, this experience was also very decisive as to when his cruelty towards animals began. "You killed it! You killed it!" I told them, "No, I didn't," but they didn't believe me. And since then, I started killing animals. But my biggest flaw is being choleric. Anger made me kill. This is what Pedro said about his life at home. "It's bad. My family is bad. My parents always fought. They insulted each other a lot. Since I was a kid, there were 9 of us siblings. I'm the 3rd. I was bothered by mazes. My dad hit my mom a lot. I would run away from home, but I would only have to come back because I had nowhere else to go, nothing to eat, and my dad would hit me with a cable and I had to hide. And I was scared. My siblings and I were raised separately, with an uncle, with an aunt. My sister me. She was older than me. My brother made me perform all acts. I was 6 years old. Are there people who don't believe me? I don't forget what I lived." Now, that anger, which caused Pedro to kill, was not only manifested in killing animals. Pedro also used to vent his frustrations in other ways. And one of the most triggering relationships he had was with his mother. He says, "My mother was bipolar. She changed character. I couldn't trust her. When I was a child, my mother beat me like a savage, and in anger, I burned the cat in the boiling pan." It's worth noting that we do not have any clinical diagnosis of Pedro's mother's mental health, but it is alleged that she indeed suffered from undiagnosed mental condition. Genetics played a huge role in steering him towards a life of crime. Taking a look at Pedro's family history, we can see that his older half-sister from his mom's side battled schizophrenia, but sadly ended up in the hospital. Then there is his own sister, Ana Cecilia, who also fought depression but tragically took her own life. Even a maternal half-sister of his mom's ended up in the hospital. And then we have Byron, Pedro's brother. Byron actually ended up traveling to Japan, and in Japan he killed 6 people, he stabbed them. He was sentenced to life in prison, but then they realized that he suffered from a mental condition, so he was put in a psychiatric ward for the rest of his life. Pedro's family history is like a dark web of mental health struggles that set the stage for Pedro's descent into crime. The highest education that Pedro achieved was finishing the 3rd grade of primary school, and his teenage years were not any better than his childhood. It's 1990 and Pedro is 17. He takes up courage and volunteers for the Peruvian army, but his military aspirations were short-lived. Pedro was being examined by psychiatrists, and as he was in the interview, the psychiatrists noticed something weird about him, like something just didn't add up. So they wanted to conduct further tests, and as they were getting to know him and they kept on asking questions, Pedro revealed what terrorized the clinicians and doctors. They heard something they will never forget. Pedro affirmed that he heard the voice of God and that God commanded him. God had ordained him to kill. Why? Because he was his missionary, because he was his disciple, and he was to cleanse the world. He had the belief that sinners deserve death, but only specific sinners: homosexuals, prostitutes, drunkards, drug users. So he was immediately expelled from the army. He did not pass the examinations, and the examinations results actually showed that Pedro had psychopathic tendencies and was a social danger. So training him in the handling of weapons would only make him a danger to society. Pedro's cousin said about this situation, quote, "When he was kicked out of the barracks, he wanted to kill himself. It took him almost a year to recover." End quote. Remember Carlos Aguilar, the guy from the beginning, Pedro's first victim? There is some debate on whether Carlos from Chancay was his first victim. Perhaps the distraught of being rejected by the Peruvian army was too much, so then he committed his so-claimed first murder, although we don't have any evidence besides his words. According to his confession, shortly after failing the psychological army test, Pedro found himself in Mala, a city in Lima, and he was feeling thirsty. As he wandered about, he saw some delicious fresh watermelons, and he took them, but the farmer that grew them caught him stealing. "Who does this guy think he is, stealing my watermelons? I've worked for these. I'm going to sell them. This is how I help my family eat. I need to sell these watermelons so that we can bring food to the table." But when Pedro was caught, he did not hesitate to kill the farmer. So Pedro killed him, and he was only 17. 16 years later, it's August 8th of 2006, and a body is found in a water well in Huaral at 8:30 in the morning. The cadaver is in a supine position, and when they managed to get the body out of the well, they realized it's a familiar face. We know this guy. It's Gerardo Cruz. We know Gerardo. But they were not so happy to find out who he was. Gerardo is a despised thief in the community. The police had detained him multiple times in the police station. He was known for drinking, stealing, he was dishonest. And 2 years earlier, Pedro Nakara and Gerardo had celebrated their successful crime. 2 years prior, they had managed to steal a taxi car and kill the driver without getting caught. But this wasn't enough for Gerardo's, whose greed asked for more and more, and he pressured Pedro in doing it again. But Pedro wasn't interested, and Gerardo was so pushy and annoying. He just pestered him. So Pedro couldn't take it anymore, and one night, he decides to kill Gerardo. Shot in the head, traumatic brain injury, 9mm pistol. The impact of the bullet had torn through flesh and bone with such merciless precision, leaving behind a scene of unspeakable horror. At the spot where he was hit, a rough tear marked his forehead, where the bullet had gone through with strong force. Blood streamed down from the wound, painting a green path across his pale face. Bits of broken bone stuck out from the wound, creating eerie shapes in the harsh daylight. The gunshot had cracked and disfigured his skull. Gerardo's body showed the strain of his final moments. His limbs spread out, as if giving in to the merciless power that had taken him. His clothes, once a barrier against the weather, now hung in shreds, proof of the violent struggle. Pedro's drive came from a strong fear of being caught for his past crimes, such as stealing the vehicle and killing someone. But he also had a mix of fear, desperation, and the need to stay alive that pushed him to silence Gerardo forever. Pedro had just killed his partner in crime. Only 10 days later, the police finds another corpse. This time is Carlos Tarzona, only 21 years old. He was a security guard in the community market, and he was known by everybody. All the housewives knew him. He was very polite and kind. He would always help them out whenever they had very heavy bags in the markets. But most importantly, he was a gentleman. He was very polite, and he would always say, "Good morning, good afternoon, thank you, please, you're welcome." He was just very easily liked, and he took his job very seriously. He really cared about protecting people. But he was now dead. Shot in the head, traumatic brain injury, 9mm pistol. Sounds familiar? He was found in an irrigation canal at 10 a.m. No witnesses, no noise. According to Carlos' mother, he was a well-respected young man, hardworking and well-known in the organization of Bautista in Huaral. There were rumors that he was involved in drug use, but this was never confirmed. His jean pockets were rifled through, and if there was anything in there, it was gone. Pedro affirms that Carlos had been using drugs, and that's why he killed him. He could not stand the thought of somebody using drugs. The Huaral police has been dealing with a lot this past few weeks, but sadly, it's not over. The next week, Maria is watching TV in the comfort of her home. She has seen the news, and she is scared, just like everybody else. They cannot believe so many murders have happened in such short time. She was only 15 years old, and she was a beacon of light in her community. He had an infectious laughter and a kind-hearted nature that just touched everybody living around her. She had her whole life ahead. Maria was known for having such a gentle demeanor and just a compassionate spirit, always ready to lend a helping hand. She would carry grocery bags for the old ladies, and she would feed stray cats and dogs. Despite the challenges she faced growing up in Centro Poblado Fundo Luicio, in the Sayan district, Maria remained resilient. She had an unwavering optimism that just shined through the darkest of times. I mean, she's got her whole life ahead of her. She turns off the TV. She's seen enough. She needs to get these horrible images and thoughts and ideas out of her mind. Murder is not something someone should dwell in. And she tells her mom she's going out. She's gonna go ride her bicycle around the neighborhood. There is no danger because the town people all know each other. She kisses her mom goodbye and leaves excited to feel the breeze in her face and enjoy the beautiful sunset that some minutes later would be showing the starry sky. Tragically, Maria's life was cut short on that fateful evening of August 19, 2006. As her innocent spirit was extinguished by an act of senseless violence. As she was driving her bicycle, a shot in the head, 9mm pistol, and just like that, she was gone. Her lifeless body was discovered by the roadside, a fatal gunshot wound to the head, serving as a chilling testament to the brutality of her untimely demise. It seemed like the killer tried to steal the bicycle because they found the bicycle just a few meters ahead of the body. However, because the bicycle was damaged, they just left it there. The killer had also left his pistol at the crime scene, with bullets still inside. So the police did local interviews, but people said nothing. They were all terrified. Nobody wanted to say anything. This would mean putting their lives in danger. Later on, it would be discovered that Pedro was the author of this crime. He says this was his only mistake, that he thought he was killing a drug user because the girl was riding her bicycle in a very dangerous neighborhood. So he shot, and then he realized it was just a little girl. This was Pedro's only regret. Then we have Whitmar. He's a 42-year-old cosmetologist. He has his own beauty salon called Gisela in Los Animas Street. And Whitmer dresses like a woman and wears makeup. He works at Gisela, cutting hair during the day. And he has a really good clientele. I mean, the business is going well. He's just so fun and friendly, and everybody enjoys talking to him. But at night, things are different. He has a second secret job. Whitmer offers social services to clients. There were rumors that he had HIV and that he was spreading it to the clients, but this was never confirmed. Pedro heard these rumors, and on November 19, 2006, around 6 p.m., Pedro Nakata entered the salon. Aware of the rumors surrounding Whitmer's sexual orientation and HIV status, Pedro sought confirmation before taking action. He was not going to make the same mistake again. He coerced Whitmer into providing sexual services, and when given the opportunity, he calmly fired 3 shots in the back of his head. The grisly murder unfolded in the confines of the salon. He also stole $500 from him. When the police found the corpse, Whitmer had his pants down. This reveals Pedro's calculated approach to a crime, motivated by prejudice and greed, and his own understanding of morals and what's right and what's wrong. Pedro exploited Whitmer's vulnerabilities and preyed upon societal prejudices. The hair salon on Las Animas Street, once lively with activity, now serves as a stark reminder of the violence hidden beneath daily life. Whitmer's absence deeply affects the salon, and his memory is still cherished by those who knew him. As the community struggles with his tragic death, questions arise about prejudice and how far people will go to assert their superiority. By facing these difficult truths, there's a potential for a future without the chains of hatred and intolerance. Or is there not? Let's talk about the 2 lovers, Nazario, a lively 24-year-old, and his beloved partner, Didier, who's 26. There was nothing they loved any more than each other, except their jobs. They were educators, they were teachers, and they both shared a passion, a very deep passion for molding young minds and fostering future leaders. Their dreams resonated in the soothing sound of flowing water as they walked hand in hand next to a water canal. They talked about their aspirations, and they just had such an unbreakable bond that was filled with love. They were known for taking walks along the irrigation canals. It was their love language, going out to stroll and talk hand in hand. They were highly regarded by the community because they were very kind and very loving. They were very dedicated, and they always treated kids with respect. They never saw children as any less than what they were. People, young minds, potential. They had potential for the future, and they could make a difference in the world. In the twilight hours of December 17, 2006, the tranquil surroundings of the urbanization Aparicio in Guaral bore witness to a tragedy that would forever shatter the peace of the community. It was around 6 p.m. when the gentle breeze carried the laughter of the 2 beloved educators. They didn't realize they had a predator following them, that had been watching them, studying their every move to find an opportunity to kill them. With callous disregard for human life, Pedro shot. Nazario fell first. His vibrant spirit was now extinguished. Just 1 shot, back of the head. Again, 9mm pistol. But there was no noise because of the rubber silencers. Didier's body was found in a very strange position, suggesting that before dying, he had knelt down, probably to ask for mercy and beg for his life. After killing them, their shoes were stolen and their pockets were rifled through. "I killed Nazario and Didier," Pedro callously declared, and his voice has such a trembling mixture of malice and self-righteousness. This is a twisted proclamation of his own warped sense of morality. Pedro justified his heinous act by labeling the couple's love as a threat to society. 1 week after, on the eve of Christmas in 2006, there are 2 drunk friends that are having a good time in La Copachola, which is a desolated terrain. Agustin is 46 years old, and Luis is 54. But they aren't really good friends. They are just 2 drunk friends who just get together just to get drunk. You know how you have friends for specific things, like you have friends to do exercise with, you have friends to study with? Well, these 2 friends were friends that would just get together to drink. They both had a severe alcohol addiction, and they both were shot with a 9mm pistol on the head. They really had a bad reputation in the community because they would urinate in public places, or they would stand on the corners of the streets just to bother ladies walking by. They would also scare young men to increase their own ego. With silent precision, Pedro closed in on Agustin and Luis. His footsteps were muffled by the soft earth beneath, and Agustin and Luis, caught off guard by the sudden eruption of violence, stood no chance against Pedro. Pedro blasted their heads with bullets. And as it turns out, Pedro would later confess that he killed them because they had witnessed the previous crime. He didn't even kill them because they were drinking. He killed them because they were loose ends. They knew what he had done, and he had to get rid of them and silence them forever. Pedro still feels no remorse for what he's done. He just justifies himself every time in saying that this is what he needs to do, this is his mission, and he needs to kill the bad people. He needs to cleanse the earth of scum, as he repeats again and again as if it was his favorite phrase. He portrays himself as a righteous avenger, claiming to liberate his victims from the suffering of their existence. When Pedro spoke to the press, he gave a version in which he positioned himself as the savior, saying the following about this double murder. Mato a las personas para que no sigan sufriendo. I kill people so that they stop suffering. Por ejemplo, a dos alcohólicos los investigué por más de un mes. For instance, these two alcoholics, I investigated them for over a month. Y cuando me enteré de dónde se reunían. And when I found out of where they would get together, I got ready. I got my pistol ready, so that with one shot, they would rest forever in peace with God. Only 3 days later, on the same neighborhood, on the fateful evening of December 27th, 2006, at 7:30 p.m., Nicolas finds himself in desperate need of assistance. Blood gushed from a fatal wound inflicted by a bullet that pierced his skull. Members of the Woodall Police Department rushed to his aid, swiftly transporting him to a hospital. However, despite their efforts, Nicolas succumbed to his injuries on the way, and his life slipping away with each passing moment. 3 years earlier, Nicolas had crossed paths with Pedro Nakata, a man with a vengeful heart. In a cruel twist of fate, Nicolas had once robbed Pedro of his money and possessions, and this act of betrayal did not go unnoticed or unpunished. Pedro was fueled by a thirst of retribution, and he tracked down Nicolas to Lotizadora San Carlos, a desolated wasteland. There, Pedro killed him. In the courtroom, Pedro said about Nicolas, quote, Nicolas smoked drugs and was a thief who had stolen from me and others, end quote. Pedro confessed, attempting to justify his actions, yet his words provided little solace to those mourning the loss of a beloved friend and family member. So far, we have all these cases. So far, these are all the cases known to the police that could be related to one killer. They all have something in common. All these cases happen in the same area, except Maria, the 6th case, and Carlos, the 1st case. So there's 8 open cases now. Who could it be? The police was trying to put the pieces together. He definitely knows the area. He knows the people. It seems like he has a motive. Witnesses were scared and did not want to share information, which reinforced the police belief that it was someone from the area. But thanks to 20 witnesses, on the night of December 28th of 2006, dozens of police officers went to the mechanical workshop where Pedro worked. Because yes, he has a job. He works in this mechanical workshop. At first, they were not sure if this was the serial killer they were after, but when one of the police officers approached to inquire about the presence of Pedro at this site, Pedro pushed him away, took out his 9-caliber Brico pistol, and began shooting and running and trying to escape. They said that Pedro put a fierce resistance, that he wounded one of the police officers, and that he would probably have escaped if it weren't for the fact that he ran out of bullets. They only caught him because Pedro accidentally shot himself on the leg. However, until this day, Pedro affirms it was one of the souls of one of his victims who pulled the trigger when the gun was in his jean pocket. They put Pedro in the police car and took him to the barracks for interrogation and showed him the evidence of 8 murders. We know you did this. We know you did all of them. This is all we have. We have proof. But Pedro said they were wrong. He was actually annoyed and quite angry. Well, obviously, right? It would be anybody's response. Are you saying I killed somebody? What? I did not do it. So maybe he was innocent. Maybe he didn't do it. That's why he's so upset. That's why he's so annoyed that we are accusing him of killing 8 people. But Pedro said, "You're wrong. I actually killed 25. He said to the police, with no remorse, looking at them in the eyes, "My mission is to cleanse the world of scum." Pedro gave himself a messianic role. He thought God assigned him this role. Pedro even called himself the Apostle of Death. In the interrogation room, Pedro narrated each murder from his perspective. It was terrifying for the police officers who had nightmares even weeks after hearing him. Pedro describes how uncomfortable he was seeing Tyrion and his partner walking holding hands. How disgusting! He proudly revealed all his other murders. And then he talks about Teresa, a 50-year-old. The police had found the body of Teresa in Waral in 2006. Her death was caused by a penetrating traumatic brain injury caused by a gunshot. And Pedro said, "Yes, I killed her. She was selling drugs." He narrates how he's walking out at night and then he sees her just sitting there smoking. Who does she think she is? And then he sees her. Por las puras vive, is what he thought. There's no point on her living, is what he thought, and he killed her. On July 20th, 2006, at 7:40 p.m., a very well-known criminal entered the emergency room in the hospital. He later died from a penetrating traumatic brain injury caused by a gunshot. And yes, Pedro killed him. Why? Because he was a criminal. One netizen said that there is no Betty Crocker guide to killing. It's messy, it's chaotic. Sometimes it's a ballet of violence. Sometimes it's just tripping on the sidewalk and cracking your skull open. It's the difference between a sledgehammer to a watermelon and a chisel to a block of ice. But Pedro was different. He had a method that he relentlessly repeated every time he killed. On November 22nd, 2006, Pedro kills 3 people in Chancay. Luis was a taxi driver and he had 2 passengers in his car. All of them had gunshot wounds in the cerebral region. These homicides were committed to facilitate the theft of the vehicle. Its parts, such as the roof, hood, windshield, were all found on December 28th, 2006, inside a property, in Pedro's property. November 18, 2006, 6:20 p.m., he kills again, and he steals again. He steals a pistol, a cell phone, and a Sony Discman from his victim. But this time, Pedro didn't work alone. He had the help of the brothers, Roman and Jose. Pedro's partners in crime would later say that Pedro did everything and they just watched him do it. But we don't know if this is true or not. Maybe they helped in the killing as more than just bystanders. On December 10th, 2006, Pedro kills Nell. Nell is a beautiful woman that works as a mototaxi driver. It's around 9:30 p.m. and it's very dark outside, but it's the best time for this kind of work because everybody's desperate to get home. Pedro orchestrated a sinister scheme as Nell was driving around looking for passengers. He colluded with a guy named Roman in a plot to steal the motor taxi. They deceived Nell in making her believe that they were passengers, but when there was no one around, they killed her and stole the motor taxi. Her body was found on the outside of the town. And again, 1 shot in the head. Pedro was arrested at a very opportune moment. It would have been better if he would have not committed any murders, of course, but he had a plan that he would have put in place if he had not been arrested. For the New Year's, Pedro planned to throw a grenade in a nightclub. I want to put a war grenade in the nightclub so that all the corrupt people, all the lost ones, all the smokers who are there will die. Pedro was consumed by his own warped and misguided sense of justice. He thought he was a vigilante blinded by his perception of righteousness. And do you want to know something crazy? Pedro Pablo Nakara was arrested when he was 33 years old, same age as Jesus of Nazareth from the Bible when he was crucified and arrested. Some netizens say that it is no coincidence that both their ministries ended at the same time. In 2007, Pedro went on trial. There was some discussion among psychiatrists about whether he was crazy or not, but the final ruling was that he differentiated good from evil and that he did not suffer from schizophrenia, but from conduct disorder, which is a persistent pattern of behavior in which the basic rights of others and the main age-appropriate social norms are transgressed. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison, the maximum sentence in Peru, for the murder of 17 people. Peru actually abolished capital punishment in 1979, except for cases of treason during wartime. Peru has also pledged to adhere to several international agreements concerning human rights, including the Pact of San Jose, Costa Rica, which is also known as the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights. This means that Peru is obligated to uphold the principles outlined in these treaties, which include provisions against the use of death penalty and ensuring respect for human rights in the country. Pedro was sentenced to fulfill his 35 years in Lurigancho prison. Allegedly, there are around 6,000 prisoners interned in Lurigancho prison, which should only accommodate 1,600 prisoners. Inside, the prisoners are in charge. Guards are not going to protect you if somebody is trying to stab you in the stomach. HIV is a time bomb for the prison and the local community. The prisoners are a core transmission group for HIV. Prostitution, tattooing, and drug misuse are rife in Lurigancho. And again, this is all alleged. It is no surprise that for Pedro, going to prison was an unbearable torment. I asked for a firing squad, something practical, just like I did with people. I shot them in the head. Naturally, he wasn't shot in the head. And on the first night he was in his cell, he tried to commit suicide by banging his head against the walls. Regarding to this, Pedro said to the press, "I hear my parents' voice and an evil voice telling me to kill all the corrupt people like homosexuals, thieves, alcoholics, and faggots. But I can't fulfill God's mission anymore because they caught me. Now I keep on hearing this voice telling me to kill myself." After the suicide attempt, Pedro was constantly monitored to prevent him from killing himself. Initially, according to the 2007 trial, Pedro was to be in prison for 35 years. But in 2009, the previous psychiatric assessment was questioned. Have you ever heard of the Messiah complex? The Messiah complex is a psychological phenomenon where an individual develops an intense belief that they are a savior. People with this complex often feel a strong sense of responsibility for others and may exhibit delusions of grandeur regarding their own abilities or mission in life. Sometimes they believe that they have some powers or insight or knowledge that other people don't have, and this sets them apart from the rest of the world as commoners. The Messiah complex is not always pathological, but in extreme cases, like Pedro's, it can be associated with mental health disorders such as narcissistic personality disorder, delusional disorder, schizophrenia. People can even start hearing voices, which is what was happening to Pedro, and have hallucinations that convince them that they saw or spoke with God, spirit, angels. We are still on the 2009 trial, and the whole trial revolves around, is Pedro mentally unfit to be in prison? Pedro's defense argument in this trial revolves around the assertion that Pedro, due to paranoid schizophrenia for his crimes, was legally not accountable for the crimes he was accused of. Pedro's defense claimed that while he had committed these acts, his mental health condition rendered him legally unavailable to be held responsible. They pointed out that upon his arrival at the detention facility, personnel from the National Penitentiary Institute, an organization in Peru responsible for overseeing the country's prison system, acknowledged Pedro's schizophrenia. The defense also said that Nakata behaved as if everything was normal. He admitted to the deaths, and he even expressed annoyance at not being accredited with more. The defense also emphasized that he did not conceal any evidence and had a family history of mental illness, particularly schizophrenia. They requested that a security measure be imposed on him, potentially within the prison system, if deemed appropriate, stressing the necessity for him to receive treatment. Without proper treatment, they argued, he would continue to pose a danger upon his release. In Pedro Nakata's case, motivation is a very important factor since he is undeniably a missionary killer. The psychiatric diagnosis was that Pedro suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, but he was able to distinguish right and wrong In paranoid schizophrenia, the feeling of having a special mission in life often occurs, as well as other delusions of grandeur. But for Pedro, it was a combination of paranoid schizophrenia and a psychopathic tendency. According to psychiatrists, all the anger that he had inside, all the traumas he suffered from his childhood, and the conditions that he suffered from caused him to have auditory hallucinations of hearing the voice of God. They said that he would do this to protect himself from feelings of anguish and guilt. And naturally, the choice of his victims also partly responded to that search to harmonize his psychopathic tendency with his moral conscience. And this was even more facilitated by the homophobia he had. In this way, Pedro saw himself on a mission to exterminate homosexuals, prostitutes, drug addicts, and other types of individuals frowned upon from a canonical morality of religious perspective. Of course, murder was an excessive, terrible, horrible, unjust measure. But therein lay the mechanism of projection, and the voice of God emerged. Pedro, wanted to vent his anger and homophobia, but it was God, in his infallibility, who ordered him to kill. Therefore, it was out of his hands. Pedro wasn't guilty anymore, because God told him so. Until this day, Pedro doesn't see himself as a monster, but as a savior, as a purifier, and this was evident in statements such as the following: "I am not a criminal, I am a cleanser. I have freed society from homosexuals and vagabonds. I only try to purify the earth of prostitutes, drug addicts, homosexuals, and muggers." What do I feel when I kill? I feel that I'm helping. What for? For people to change, for the world to change. I want peace in the world. He would also say, "I killed 25 people to cleanse the world of scum." But we know that Pedro not only killed people who he considered corrupted. Pedro justifies his crimes of stealing as a lesser evil necessary to continue with his purifying mission. Necessity made me sacrifice good people, but I did it to get money and obtain bullets to continue God's mission. I didn't intend to make money. I don't know if others did. With what I got, I only bought ammunition. In the 2009 trial, Pedro Nakata was declared mentally unfit, and therefore the 35-year sentence was declared void due to his mental incapacity, and Pedro was transferred to the psychiatric ward of Lurigancho Penitentiary. It is not safe for anybody that Pedro is out in the streets. He has publicly admitted that, if free, he will continue his bloody purifying mission, while no one in their right mind would think Pedro had the right to murder others due to certain moral failings according to him. On one occasion, in an angry, tearful, and whiny tone, Pedro said to journalists and the surrounding police officers, "This is crap. That's why I'm like this. Damn it!" This was another poor way to justify his actions. Pedro killed 15 men and 2 women, and he says Maria, the 15-year-old, was his only mistake. Pedro says, "Only God can judge you, but my job is to take you with him. God forgives, but I do not." If you're wondering what happened to his brother Byron Jonathan Nakata Ludenya was arrested in 2015 in Japan for stabbing 6 people to death. Something very bizarre is that Pedro's father's name is Jose, and Pedro's mother's name is Maria, like Joseph and Mary in the canonic Bible. As we wrap up today's video, I want to extend my deepest gratitude to each and every one of you for your support and engagement. Remember, let's cultivate a culture of self-care and respect within and outside our community, encouraging one another to prioritize our well-being, both online and offline. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me. Join me to discover the ripple effects of crime in the next video. Peace.